Hi, welcome, and I'm very glad that you were able to be here this morning. As you can see, the topic of my presentation has changed just a little bit. It's Steinbeck and Vasconcelos, La Raza Cósmica, and the Sea of Cortez, a slight change in emphasis. And this picture here is Jose Vasconcelos, who I'm going to talk about, and Diego Rivera, the great muralist, at a public event, just kind of my starting shot. This is part of a larger project because I've long been interested in the ways in which Steinbeck is different from his contemporaries as American writers. As we know, he was a little bit younger. He didn't serve in World War I. He didn't seek association with major writers who were his contemporaries. He didn't travel to Europe. And as a result, he develops this modernism that is different from his contemporaries, free of European influence. Now, there are lots of reasons that we have this difference of Steinbeck, but I think one of them is the influence of Mexico. Sorry, I messed that screen up a little bit. As anybody who studies Steinbeck knows, there were all kinds of early influences on his life. He was very aware of the Mexican past in California. He was very familiar with paisanos. We know that he believed that marginalized Americans were in some way more authentic. An easy example would be Cannery Row and Mac and the Boys as well. He was also friends with Max Wagner, a childhood friend whose mother was a correspondent who covered the Mexican Revolution. Max and his family were from Mexico. They left as a result of the revolution. Max's first language was English and was Spanish, and Steinbeck was very fascinated with that. And Max went on to be a pretty prominent actor in both Mexican and American film. So that was one set of influences. And then in 1935, he and his first spouse, Carol, moved to Mexico, where they live off the Paseo de Reforma, which is pictured here as well. And they were very taken with cultural sites in the cultural past in Mexico. They saw a number of working class people participate in the arts, and they met Diego Rivera, who was a seminal figure as in the arts. And the Mexican Revolution used art in very particular ways. It began very early on. Here is a painting by Jose Guadalupe Posada. I'm sorry, it's a woodcut, but it's the Maderista, who's revolutionary, the sad Maderista, and his sad sweetheart. Um, and so these artists celebrated the country's pre-Columbian, pre-Hispanic roots, and they really sought to establish a national identity that was different from European influence, free from European influence, and religious people in conquistadores were described as brutes. And furthermore, they believed that education could form a national unified identity, and they wanted to use art as ways to demonstrate the ideals of the revolution. And the other thing is, art is visible proof that the government is doing something and delivering on some of its promises. So they used art very strongly, and it was something that Steinbeck was fascinated with when he moved to Mexico City. I believe Carol first brought his attention to this. Susan Schillema has a really nice chapter in which she talks about this transformation as well in her book, Carol and John Steinbeck. Now, the architect of this artistic program, if you will, is Jose Vasconcelos. Jose Vasconcelos is known as the cultural caudillo of Mexico, and I've listed a number of the things that he did. He was the first rector of UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autonomía de Mexico, which is the National University of Mexico. He was the first Secretary of Education. He was director of the National Library. And lest you think the Minister of Education was just another cabinet position, the Constitution was actually revised to write the Secretary of Education into the Constitution. And the post-revolutionary government spent more money on education than they did any other expense except national defense. So they were serious about their education as well. And just an example of this, this is the logo designed by Vasconcelos for the National University of Mexico. And the slogan is, Por mi raza habla el espíritu for my race the Spirit shall speak. Now, they're still using this more than 100 years later, and you can see, if you look, you've got all of Latin America, the idea of this sort of pan-Latin American identity as well. You have the eagles, which are references to the Mexican flag, and reference to both the Aztec past and the current present as well. You have the Popocatépetl, which is the volcano visible from Cuernavaca as well. You've got nopales or cactus as well. So you have all this symbolism in the national logo. And this is just an example of ways in which Vasconcelos tried to incorporate these ideas of an indigenous Mexican past and a Native American past free of European influence into his work as well. So here's probably the most famous painting that we know of from this period. This is by Diego Rivera. And I'll just stop and let y'all look at this for a moment. And there's been a lot of work done on this painting, but basically on left is the bad stuff. You've got the European influences, you've got which result in Nazism and death as well. You've got the civilized people as well. And you move toward the other side and you notice, of course, the Greek statue's lost its head. And we've got more traditional people who are workers, people who look more like everyday Mexicans. You've got farm growing. You've also got Trotsky and some other people as well. But it's a large allegorical painting which illustrates a lot of these values that the Mexican Revolution had as well. And of course, this we all know about the murals that Vasconcelos issued this call to have muralists come around the world, and you have the big three who are Diego Rivera, David Alfonso Siqueiros, and Jose Clemente Orozco, who would later illustrate the Pearl, come among a bunch of other famous artists. Frida Kahlo all participate in this as well. But it wasn't just that. There was theater, there was music. The National Ballet of Mexico becomes folklorico. And if you know anything about folklorico dance, that's regional dance, that is folk dance. Those are folkways as well. And all of this is part of a very strong agenda that Vasconcelos had to reject the European and affirm the value of that which is natively Mexican, many of which are still in effect today as well. Now here's Vasconcelos himself. I won't give a whole biography as well, but he was educated both in Mexico and the U.S. for a long time. He lived in Piedras Negras, which is right across in Texas from Eagle Pass as well. And he talks about this experience, the experiences of being educated in the United States and hearing these versions of Mexico that were different from his experience as well. So he talks about being told that Mexicans are semi-civilized people. And he says, on the other hand, we believe that Yankees had just acquired culture and we had printing before you did. Now, these are quotes from his autobiography called Mexican Ulysses as well. You get a sense of this pride that he has, and also specifically the idea that the war with Texas, the War of Texas Independence, is contested space. If you read Steinbeck at all, that probably will echo a number of other things. He once wrote to Julius Buck that the hero of the Alamo was not Jim Bowie or Davy Crockett, but Santana, and that he was impressed with the Mexican side of the story. In Travels with Charlie, he jokingly talks about forming the American Friends of Texas Succession as well. So this is something that Steinbeck himself grappled with as well, these versions of Mexican history and the way different people had interpreted that as well. Vasconcelos is also well known for a book called La Raza Cósmica, which is the cosmic race. And in it, he says, the central thesis of this book is that the distinct races of the world often mingle, forming a new type of human being made of a selection of peoples who already exist. And that's my translation as well. And his idea was that somos mestizajes, this new human being, the idea that the Mexican is a new race of human being, an amalgamation of all the peoples in the world. Now, I don't have time to share it with you, but if you Google Jose Vasconcelos, you can find TV shows that he did in which he conducted debates about Hernan Cortés and the Hispanicization, the Spanish colonization of Mexico, and the cultural consequences of that to the indigenous people and the ongoing effects of the Spanish colonization on Mexico and Mexicans as well. It's a very important point. So I think this echoes Sea of Cortez a lot. Steinbeck says it's advisable to look from the tide pool to the stars and back to the tide pool again. And of course, these are echoes of the cosmic race. I'm not going to develop that theory a whole lot right there, right now, but I'm going to do that in the future as well. And so some things that I want to think about. I'm not the first person to argue that the Mexican Revolution had profound effects on U.S. culture. Ruben Flores, Backroads Pragmatist, and other people have as well. But I want to explore that. I want to look through a more detailed lens at Vasconcelos' cosmic theories and Sea of Cortez. They line up very well. I wasn't going to do a line reading on an oral presentation like this as well, but it will be published eventually as well. I want to explore elements of Mexican modernism and Steinbeck's other work. I've already published a piece in which I demonstrate that Steinbeck's creation of the play novella genre was an outgrowth of the way Mexican Revolution used theater to teach people and to reach people who had been marginalized or dispossessed. And of course, this leads into the creation of The Forgotten Village, the film and the book in 1941 as well. And I want to further develop some connections between Steinbeck and Diego Rivera. Both Susan Chillenlaw and Jackson Benson talk about the relationship that Steinbeck had with Diego Rivera as well, and also with Jose Clemente Orozco, who is one of the other big three Mexican muralists. And he also illustrated the Pearl as well. So this is where I'm going to take this research a little bit. And there's some theoretical implications as well. I don't want to go through it as well, all the different literary theories, but there's great links to transnationalism, to border study, and Pacific studies, all of which problematize history in some way, and all of which talk about the way majority minority populations intersect and interact. And people talk about liminality, or the way things that happen when multiple cultures and multiple languages meet. So I think there's huge theoretical implications of the effect the Mexican Revolution had on Steinbeck's work in American literature as well. And here's some references, which I will leave up there just for you to look at for a moment as well. And then a little bit more information if you want to contact me. Here's my contact information. I'll also put in a plug. If you're interested in reviewing books for Steinbeck Review, contact me at this address given here, or Carter Johnson, who is sharing this session. That is the end of my presentation. I am very grateful that you came, and I will be delighted to answer any questions during question time. Thank you so much.